All right, everybody. Thank you for coming to Developing and Operating Lightning Talks. We have 4 fabulous presenters here for you. Each of them has a lightning talk. Each lightning talk is going to be 10 minutes. If you have questions, which I'm sure you will, please write them down, put them in your phone, put them in your laptop, and remember them for the end. We're going to have a couple minutes at the very end for questions, and then if there are any more, please go find our presenters, and they'll be happy to answer you. Anyway, let's get the show started. First, we have Dave Ormsbee. He's a software architect at Axim Collaborative, and he has a great presentation for you today. Let's hear it for him.
All right, thanks, folks. Today, we're talking about import and export, the forgotten feature. And I don't mean that is necessarily that we forget it exists, but as developers, often we don't really think about it until way too late in the process, which is a pity because it can be hard to get right, and this has been us on a couple of things like milestones. So what do I mean by import-export? In Studio, you have in the Tools menu, you have the ability to import a course, export a course. These are gzip tar files. Inside, you'll have a directory structure, a whole bunch of XML files, some files and uploads, images, metadata, all kinds of stuff in here. Now, why would someone want to use import and export? Like, what are the use cases? So obviously, backup and restore. Copying content to different servers. Some institutions have multiple servers that they run. There are advanced OLX features that you cannot get in the Studio UI. I'm not going to cover those, but they are really cool. Bulk editing is a major use case I think most developers don't think about. When T-Curl changed its name to Axim, and we had to update that name across a few courses and dozens of instances of it, it's much easier to do that in a text editor with replace all than to actually go through Studio and hunt for those. Off-platform authoring is a much more advanced use case, but sometimes people actually author their whole course in GitHub and then move it onto the platform. So when you're thinking about import and lifecycle concerns, there are 2 basic types of data that you have to think about. We have version data, which is going to be your OLX, your XML. This is what goes into XBlock attributes. And these are governed by the whole draft publish process. And then you have unversioned data. So this is the data that is in the import file, but that is not part of draft and publish. Things like course files, uploads, or some other metadata files as well. So I'll show you an example, tagging. So Jenna talked about tagging this morning, but the idea that we can have a piece of content and say, this video, for instance, teaches this particular skill. So the initial idea we had was that tags would be added as a mixin attribute to XBlocks. So this is an important point that XBlocks do not define all the attributes in their XML. The system, like Studio itself, can inject attributes into the serialized format. But so it would look like this. It would have a video tag, and they would have, in the video block, we would have a tags attribute, and it would list out the tags for this video. But again, this is versioned because it's in the OLX. And tags can be applied outside the draft publish flow. So this was not going to fly. We ended up coming to the decision that we would put it in a separate metadata file that would have a big mapping of usage keys to tags. And this is better for bulk editing anyways. It can result in sort of mismatches on import, but that's better than the alternative. And here is where I want to caution. Yes, you can get around this. You can circumvent this. You can do clever things to shove unversioned data into a version thing with auto-publishing and so forth. This has happened. People have done this. This is a world of pain and maintenance errors and bugs. Happy to talk about that more in detail afterwards. But please don't do that. OK, so here's another instance where import and export, we've had issues. Say you have a course that uses content from a library. That course is going to be referencing a version of that library. That version is going to be output in the course's XML. That library holds default values. So say you're using a problem in your course, and your problem has, you set it to 3 attempts, but the library default is 5 attempts. If you bring that course into another instance, those defaults are gone. and you have no way to reset to them. Maybe, and you're like, yeah, whatever. I'll just import my library into that other instance too, and then it'll be fine. And yeah, it will find that library. The course will find the library. Congratulations. And it's going to say, hey, I want this version of this library. And the library is going to say, no, that's not my version. Because this version number is a Mongo object ID that is dynamically generated every time you create a new version, which means it does not exist in the new instance at all. And we have, like, there is no way for the course to know if this really is the right version or not. And the reconciliation of that, or the attempt, the attempt to reconcile that causes all kinds of problems. All right, so quick takeaways. Imports should be self-contained. That course should export out with all the metadata that it needs. It shouldn't have to have that the accompanying library there. Identifiers should not be server specific. You should not have Mongo object IDs in your OLX because that will not exist on the other side. All right, backwards compatibility. This should go without saying. I think we all have an intuitive understanding that breaking content is bad. Don't do it. Like, okay, yes, this code is ugly, it's weird, but how much pain is it actually causing you? If you don't have to touch it, if it's not causing bugs, just leave it alone. Also, the question to ask, if you are considering moving code, removing code, breaking backwards compatibilities, how usable is that content after you remove that code? So a great example of this is today in Redwood, if you want to, in the video block, you can specify the slower and faster speed versions of this video as different YouTube IDs. YouTube added this as a feature that you can set the speed to any video, I don't know, 6, 7 years ago, whatever, but this still exists. And it stayed there because we haven't really had to touch it. If we did a revamp of the video block, we can remove this and actually feel okay about it because YouTube's gonna have that feature by default now. The other thing to think about is forwards compatibility. So what happens when you export content from a Redwood instance and you import it into Palm, right? Things going backwards, the other direction. And the important thing for you to know there is that import and export ignores and passes through attributes that it doesn't understand. This is your secret weapon. So if I add this magic attribute to a problem tag, and I import it into an instance and I export it back out, the system will ignore it, nothing will use it, but that it will go in, it will come back out. So how is this useful? So, an example I gave earlier was that courses don't have their library defaults serialized with them, and they should. So we want to encode library defaults in the course OLX. And one approach that we looked at was to add a new type of field that would be like a special upstream field. So, and like make the runtime clever. So the runtime would look for the display name first, and if it didn't find a display name, it would use the upstream display name, which is the library default for this. But this would behave differently in older instances. This breaks older instances. If you exported from your new instance to an old one and you didn't override the display name, it would show up as blank problem because the old instance doesn't know what upstream means, so it's looking just for a display name. More compatible approach is to write the display name, like even though it looks redundant, write the display name anyways, and write the upstream default. And this will actually survive the round trip even. Like you can still have that information even if you go to an older instance and back to a newer one. Also, final note, compatibility is about how something is used. It's not an academic exercise. So one of the things that Kyle actually very insightfully pointed out is that this terrible thing where we encode JSON into the attribute is semantically equivalent to this. XML treats these as exactly the same. So why do we do the top one? That's crazy. So yeah, let's fix it and let's make it output the easier to read version. But in order to do that, there will be a forum post. There will be an ADR on it. There will be messaging about it because someone somewhere has written this code. And when we change this code is going to break. And that's partly on them, but it's also on us, right? We have to make sure that at the very least they can see what happens and they can know how to fix it. That's it. Thank you very much.
Awesome. That was great, Dave. So now let's receive Braden MacDonald, CTO at OpenCraft, who will talk to us about React Query and why we love it.
All right, thanks. So I'm here to evangelize React Query. For anyone who's working on the front end, you might already be aware of it, but if not, I want to tell you about it. To set the stage for React Query, it's helpful to compare it to Redux. If we go back to 2015, Dan Abramov from Meta, I think, published Redux. And at the time, React didn't have a good way to manage state in your React front ends, nor did it have the context component that you can use to share data among many different components. So the React community was very quick to adopt this Redux framework, which was at the time a pretty elegant way of managing state and sharing data between different components in your React app. Over time, Redux grew more complicated and built up these layers around it and best practices. So today, if you want to use Redux in your application and really understand what's going on, you have to know all of these things. And there are, of course, things like Redux Toolkit that makes it easier, but if you really want to understand it, there's a lot of complexity to it. And when OEP 11 was published in 2016, Redux was hugely popular in the React community. In fact, people would often say things like, you should never use React without Redux. And so most OpenEdX MFEs use Redux to manage the state and the data in the applications. Let's take a look at what that looks like. This is a real example from the course authoring MFE, one that I have been working on a lot lately. In this case, we're loading the course team for a course. So this is the list of users that are allowed to edit the course. The Redux state is shared for the whole MFE. So in this case, what you see on the screen is the state for the whole MFE, but we're just talking about the course team, which is one tiny part of that state. So here's a slice which defines how to fetch the course team. I'm going to skip through, but the point is this is a lot of boilerplate that's saying we're going to fetch the course team, we're fetching the course team, we fetch the course team, and then we store it in the store. Here's the core part of the Redux code for this, which is actually using an HTTP client to make a REST request to the server and get that list of users back. And then there's more boilerplate. We have selectors to fetch the course team back out of the state once we put it in the big state object. And then we have using selectors in the components to actually get that data at the end. So as you can see, there's a lot of boilerplate involved in Redux, even with Redux Toolkit and all these things that try to reduce the boilerplate for you. I want to compare it to TanStack Query. TanStack Query is a state management framework for React that also works with other frameworks like Vue. When we use it with React, we just call it React Query because we don't need the full name. So you'll usually just hear it called React Query. They call it a state management framework, but I like to think of it as a data loading framework. So anytime you need to load some data from the server, think about React Query, and you can use it to load the data in a nice way. So let's go back to the example of the course team. Fetching it, first we need to define how to contact the API and get the request back. This part is exactly the same as in Redux, so there's no change here. But then we'll wrap that function in a React hook. So we define a new hook called useCourseTeam. It accepts the course ID as a parameter, and then it calls this key function of React Query, which is useQuery. And as you can see, useQuery, in its simplest case, it just takes two functions, two parameters. One is a function, so we just pass in the getCourseTeam API method that we just saw. And the second is a query key. And the query key is just an array of strings that uniquely identifies this piece of data that we're fetching. So different courses have different teams. We just have to make sure the course ID is somewhere in the query key. And that way it knows that the team for this course is different than the team for that course. And those are two separate pieces of data that we fetch from the server. And I didn't even show this for the Redux example because we already saw so much, but that's already the end of React Query. And now here's how you actually use it in one of your components. So you just use your new hook that you defined, use course team, you put it in the component, and it returns a whole bunch of fields like is loading, data, error, and there's all kinds of others, but these are the big three that most people use. The nice thing about this is you get this loading state, the error handling and stuff for free, handled automatically by React Query. And it guarantees that only one of these three things is truthy at any given time. So in your component, you just need to handle these three situations. Either it's loading, so display a loading spinner, or there's an error, so display the error message, or your data is there successfully, and you can use the data to display to the users. So it helps you follow best practices for displaying error messages and loading states and all that, but you don't have to implement the details behind it. You get it anytime you need a piece of data. One of the nicest things about React Query is it has a very simple declarative API, especially compared to Redux. So I can tell you right now, there's 4 main concepts you need to know to use React Query. First is this use query function. You have some data you need to load from the server. You use query to define how to get that data from the server. And as part of that, you need to define a query key, which is just a string, an array of strings that distinguishes requests. And as we'll see, React Query uses that to deduplicate requests. So if you ask for the same course team in several different places in your front end, it will only make one request to the server. Then there's use mutation. I won't get into the details, but if you modify data on the server, you can use mutation to send a post request to the server. And as part of that, you can use this last method, invalidate queries, which will mark that data as being updated on the server, and then it will refresh it. And anywhere in your front end that you use that data or any derived data that depends on it, it will refresh and display the latest state to your users. And that's basically all there is to it. So when you compare to Redux, you don't have to learn about the store, the state, the reducers, and all this other stuff. So as you can see, there's way less boilerplate when you use React Query. And you get is loading, is fetching, is error, and all this other metadata about the status of your request for free. And so it helps you use that in a very consistent way to build a good user experience that can handle edge cases effectively and also do things like automatically refresh. So here's an example of how the deduplication works. If you call this use user details in 2 different places in your component tree, and you call use course team in 2 different places, and you have some other thing like enrollment details, that the 2 pink requests or purple requests will only cause 1 request to the server, and likewise the 2 red use course team instances will only cause 1 request to the server, and it gets cached on the client. So you can see 5 different calls to React Query here, but there would only be 3 requests to the server. And so the nice thing about this is if you compare with Redux, you have to define this big global state for your whole MFE. And it's like a giant global variable that you have to sort of manage and predict what data you'll need for your MFE. Whereas with React Query, you just request the exact little piece of data you need as you need it, and it will automatically get it in the most efficient way. For developers, React Query has some features that are so nice they're almost magical. A simple one is background refresh, which just every few minutes it will refresh the data from the server, and if it's changed, it will re-render your React component and update it. This works even in production, and you can customize it if you need to. But the one that I use a lot as a developer is refresh on focus. If you switch to the Django admin panel or to the command line, and you run some command to update data on your instance, and then you click back onto your browser, you'll see it refreshes, immediately shows the data. It acts as if there's a WebSocket and there's live updating with your backend, but you don't have to make any backend changes at all. So it's a really magical experience that makes development much nicer. So in summary, you get a really simple declarative API, way less boilerplate in your front-end code, automatically get the is loading, is fetching, is error metadata for each request to the server. You don't have this giant global state shared everywhere, automatic deduplication of requests, background refresh. And not to mention, it has a whole bunch of extra features if you want, if you need infinite scrolling, pagination, optimistic updates, preloading, or even server-side rendering. It has nice, simple APIs to implement all of them. It's way easier than you'd expect. It has dev tools in your browser for debugging the status of all the requests. And for all that, it's about the same size as Redux Toolkit and has no dependencies. So I'm a huge fan of React Query. We use it already in several MFEs, but I hope that we can use it a lot more and gradually use less Redux and more React Query. I think it's a better user experience and it's a better developer experience. So.
Thank you, Braden. That was awesome. Now let's give a warm welcome to Brian Smith, senior developer at senior front-end developer, at Axim Cooperative, who will talk to us about our translations and where they are.
Hi, I'm Brian Smith, and this talk is Where in the World Are Our Translations? So in order to answer that question, first we need to answer, what are our translations? And this is something where you'll get a different answer depending on who you talk to. Because if you talk to our learners, our translations are the learning platform showing up in the language that they expect when they go to learn. But if you talk to engineers, translations are formatting logic and source strings and translated strings, so it's all code. So how do we get translations to our learners? Well, we've got our source strings and our formatting logic, and then we've got our translated strings, and when we combine those, we have a translated platform for learners. So at some point in there, we have to build that together. There has to be a build step that says, let's take these translated strings, let's take this formatting logic, and let's actually build this translated platform. And so before, we would do this by just having all of the translated strings checked in to the Git repo next to the formatting logic and the source strings. And this makes a lot of sense until you think about the fact that we don't just have one repo. We have a lot of repos. And so this led to every single repo having all of the translations and the logic for formatting, and we would have to build each one, and then we'd get our platform. And so there are some problems with this. One of the problems is that we had a ton of commits just updating translations. It was something where looking through, updating translations was a huge piece of Git history for every single repo. Also, there was the problem of named releases. By having things checked in with the code, we were freezing those translations in time with the releases. So if you were running latest master or latest main, sure, you would be getting up-to-date translations. But if you were running Palm.2, then you would be on the Palm.2 version of the translations. And that's just not the best experience for somebody that wants to be able to update translations. But I've only talked about learners and engineers. I think there's one very important group of people that we haven't mentioned in the translation story, and that is our translators. What do our translations look like for our translators? Well, the translators that work on the OpenEdX platform do that translation work within Transifex, which is a web app where you can see all of these source strings, and then you have a nice interface for reviewing and actually translating with a bunch of tools provided by Transifex, and you can go through and update all of these translations. So the kind of full story of getting translations to learners would be, we have our source strings and our formatting logic, and then we make sure that those source strings make it to Transifex, and then translators can do the translation work, and then those translated strings make it back into the Git repo, at which point we can build our translated platform for learners. So let's focus on this piece, the getting translations from translators. Before, it looked like this. Every single repo would talk to Transifex, and then we would get those source strings, or we would get those translated strings back into all of those repos, which meant every repo needed code to talk to Transifex. And that is not ideal. And so there has to be a better way to handle this. We still want to get to this world of we have our source strings, we have our formatting logic, and then we have our translated strings, and those live somewhere, and then we can build them together and have this translated platform for learners. And so one of the first things that comes to mind is, well, what if we just grab it straight from Transifex? Is that a thing we can do at build time? Could we do that? And it seems like a good idea, but there are a couple of problems there. And one of the big problems is that pulling from Transifex requires an API key. And so that would mean every single time somebody tries to deploy an instance of the OpenEdX platform, they would then need to have an API key to be able to pull the translations from Transifex. So that's just not a viable solution going forward. But we still want to get to this world where these translated strings live somewhere that isn't in every single repo right next to the code. And so that's where we got to the OpenEdX translations repo. And so now we have one repo where all of our source strings and our translated strings can live, and we can take those, combine them, and build a translated platform for learners. And so how does this work? We've got all of our repos, those still have their source strings and formatting logic. As a developer, you can still say, hey, I'm adding a button, it says okay. And then you make sure that that's internationalized in a way that we know that this is a string that says okay, and we have the ways that we need to format that to work as a button. That all exists in those repos still, but all of those source strings then make it into the OpenEdX translations repo, at which point we have that one integration point with Transifex, and we can get those translated strings back into that OpenEdX translations repo. And so there are a couple of steps to this. We've got the extract translation source files step. So extract translation source files is a GitHub Actions workflow within the OpenEdX translations repo. It pulls down all of the repos that we need translations for and runs logic that exists in those repos to extract those source files and get them into a format that Transifex can understand. And then those can live in the OpenEdX translations repo. And so that gets us to the source strings exist in the OpenEdX translations repo port. Then we have the actually getting the translated strings into the OpenEdX translations repo part. And this happens with the Transifex integration GitHub app. And so this is now one integration between Transifex and one repo where the source strings make it up and the translated strings make it down. And so when we're pulling it all together, we now have all of the repos with the source strings and the formatting logic. We then have the OpenEdX translations repo with the translated strings, and then at build time, we can pull those together and create that translated platform for learners. And this happens with make pull translations. This is a new target in the make files that exist in every repo that we need translations for. And this is powered by the OpenEdX Atlas tool. And this is something that Omar will go into much more detail about than I will now, but the short story of it is a great way to get the translations from the OpenEdX translations repo into all the places that any given repo needs them to be able to actually build that translated platform for learners. And this is all kind of based on the idea that pulling at build time is better. Instead of having everything checked in with the code, it's better to pull the translations at build time. And so I'm going to focus on one little story as to why that is the case. So let's say that you found an incorrect translation in a named release, and you wanted to fix that. Let's say you found it like a day after that release was cut. So before, you found the incorrect translation, and then you could go into Transifex and you could fix it, and then you need to get that fix backported to the release branch, and then you need to wait for a new point release, and then after that point release is out, you could deploy that point release and finally have your new fixed translation. And if you caught this like the day after release, it could be 2 months before you actually get that one string fixed in that one place, unless you start doing some hacky stuff on your own. Whereas now, you can find an incorrect translation, fix it in Transifex, that fix will be synced to the OpenEdX translations repo. Then all you have to do is rebuild, and you can deploy that fixed translation. And this can all happen in less than a day. And so we've already talked through why fixing an incorrect translation in a named release has a better story now than it did before, but there are a couple of other benefits to pulling at build time. One is easier to manage repositories. We have a glanceable Git history where we don't have a ton of updated translations. When you're just kind of looking at the changes, they're actually meaningful. We have smaller checkouts because you don't have all of those translated strings in every single repo. We have fewer third-party integration points. We don't have to connect to transifex on every single repo throughout the org. And the custom translation story is also simplified, and Atlas is a tool that makes that easier. And so I have some links to learn more, both links to the OpenEdX translations and OpenEdX Atlas repos, as well as links on openedx.org about kind of the entire story of getting to where we are now with translations. So it goes into more detail than I was able to in this lightning talk. And all of these slides will be available after the conference, so you can actually click these links. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Last but not least, we have Omar Al-Ithawi. He's the founder of ZeitLabs, and he's going to go into a deeper dive on translations by telling us how to manage translations with OpenEdX Atlas. Let's hear it for Omar.
Hi. So Brian talked to us about like why we got here, like what was the translation before, and why like we've made the change. So there is a bit of a details that I'm going to skip, which is like exactly how to use Atlas and like what is like Atlas in details. Well, in short, it's a bash script that is there like developed by edX that pulls translations via command line. The point here is that like what we've made, like I mean, basically this is OP 58, this OpenEdX enhancement proposal 58. The point of it is to get translations like smoothly and quickly for operators, and so translators wouldn't have to worry about it, and operators wouldn't have to worry about it either. And also like not to forget like developers like me and like some of the attendees here, like we don't want to make their life like well more difficult. So the point here is like that Atlas is most of the time gets out of the way, and so like you don't really have like to know how it works unless well you follow the links that Brian have shared. So what I'm gonna focus on, like there's a quite of a jump from what Brian have said and what I'm going to say. What I'm going to focus on, let's say you want to deploy Redwood. I don't expect anyone like here to use Redwood, but like please surprise me. Anyone here uses Redwood? Well, no. Oh, wow, that's way too more money than expected. Okay, awesome. So if you build a Redwood, like say, if you have a Redwood dev stack or Redwood production, you're already using Atlas. So hopefully, did it break for you, Kyle? Awesome, Braden? Okay, so like, yeah, that's the point. Like there's quite of a jump and it's an abstraction, so you don't have to worry about it. So yeah, so basically, let me click a space, no?
Space.
Which one?
Yeah, you can use the clicker or space. Like it's already there.
Yes, awesome. Yeah, so in Tutor, like which is the recommended way like to deploy OpenEdX. Well, I assume like most of you are using it for your organizations. If you have OpenEdX, even if you like though may not know it. So there's this little command have been like this little command have been. Should I click here? Okay, yes. This command, like Atlas pull, and there's like stuff behind it, have been implanted, added to everywhere, basically micro front ends, that's a React part, like a front end, and the mobile apps, and the of course like the Python. This has support for Xblocks, plugins, pretty much everything you can think of, like in terms of OpenEdX that needs translation. That's pretty much anything that's user facing. So this is already done. That took about like a year and a half. It's a quite of an effort, but like the point here is not to talk about it. The point here is like how to use it. So you can use it simply by, well, tutor images build, and that's it. Like that's the way to use Atlas Tutor. Atlas Poll. You don't have to think about it. And this is like the level that we are so happy like that we've basically done this. So this is more of a feature announcement than a detailed description. That's why it's a lightning talk, I guess. So let's see if you do this, what's going to happen? What's going to happen is that Atlas will pull the latest translations that's available in the GitHub repository, which came recently, let's say every day, or let's say every couple of minutes from Transifex. So it's always fresh and hot and like smells nice. And if you fix a bug, yeah, if you fix a bug, you'll basically get it. As an operator myself, like I've been operating like OpenEdX instances for a long time, I can tell you, it's really tough to add a new feature or like to get Transifex fixes. Like I do some fixed Transifex, I get it into my platform. It's tough. Right now, it's less tough. I wouldn't say like it's completely smooth, but this is recent release, so we're really open for feedback. So you know who I am. Like my name is Omar. If something goes wrong, you know who to blame or ask, whichever version you prefer. I'm fine with both, by the way. So yeah. So that thing. So what if I'd like to use a custom translations? Anybody here have customized translations? Did some? Wow. Okay, that's okay. Good. So we hope to make it a little bit easier for you. So we have a customer that doesn't like the word course translation in Arabic. Thank you. Yeah, doesn't like the word course translation in Arabic. There's 3 of them. I'm Arabic and I speak English. Hopefully you understand me. So and in Arabic there are 3 translations, and some customers like this one and the others like that one. So you can't give them both. Transifex, I mean, we're not there yet, and let's hope that we have this flexibility. So what we do is basically we wish that there is a search and replace for this word, and I click save, and somehow it makes it into my translations without having to fork edX platform, without having to fork, let's say, I don't is it 80, Brian? 80 repositories that we work with? I lost count.
I just say multiple dozens.
Yeah, multiple, a lot of them. Okay, so we had 300 pull requests during to make this OAP 58 is done. If you want to fork translations for every one of them and do search and replace, I think you would do 80 pull requests with before Redwood. So right now what we did is that we put their translations on a repository. You can check it online, and we basically configured these Atlas repository and Atlas revision variables, and tutor images build, and it works. I mean, we've gone through a couple of hoops to learn actually about this new tool, because although I built it, it doesn't mean that I fully have tested it. So it's working, and we did the replace, and they're happy. Oh, okay, it works. Finally, we have the word that we like. So that it was a really good way to use Atlas. Yeah. By the way, this is Palm. This is not a mistake, and we've backported it to one specific repository, and yeah, that's how it works. So I expect many questions. I'm on Slack. I'm on GitHub issues on the OpenEdX translations repository, or every repository that basically Brian have shared. So please remember your questions and let me know. These are a few bonuses. I still have 3 minutes, so I'm going to use them. So that's how it looks. If you understand, if you have written Docker, that's how it looks. This is the Atlas poll. We put the repository. That's a tutor overhang, tutor Docker file for OpenEdX. So this is the hugest, the biggest. So we can see an Atlas poll here for plugins, an Atlas poll for Exablocks. And it's nice stuff here. I recommend, for developers, please come in, check my work, critique it. But no promise that I'm going to fix it, because it works. Okay, so the translations, it pulls translation from the edX platform to the that's the remote stuff, and this is the local stuff. This is not mounting. This is just git pull and copying files. But it's one command, and it does lightweight pulling, so the repository can be really huge. But this one goes really fast within a couple of seconds. Our benchmark is the pull from the edX platform, and it's really fast. So that's a good thing. So the other thing it pulls for Studio Frontend. we try to support everything, like even some stuff that had no translations, it's supported. So that I think like we done like nice stuff. But if it breaks, sorry, we'll try to fix it. Just tell us about it. Okay. So for like we need to compile stuff. So like you can see we're compiling stuff all at runtime. So the image build will take like a minute or two more. Sorry about that, but like you're getting hopefully a really good, interesting feature. So this is like much nicer. I think this is credentials. Yeah, this is the MFE. So the MFE is basically every MFE has pull translations because every MFE has like different features. So we pull translations from that one. This is the command. If you feel customizing it, like you can just basically fork the Docker file. And I know like you don't like forking, I neither, but sometimes like maybe you want to do some interesting stuff and you can do, or you can just like pass Atlas options and it'll work. So all of the stuff, like, I mean, things that you build is the same two variables. We have a third one that you can check out, like, what else do I need? I'm gonna let you discover it. So yeah, like this is like some stats. It's like almost 300 pull requests. That's like basically, I'm not complaining. This is like work is thankfully funded by the Axim collaborative. So, but yeah, like it's a really huge stuff that I'm super excited about. I think that's it. Yes, I'm done. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you so much, guys. We managed to finish with 2 minutes for questions. Very impressive, by the way. Finishing on time for lightning talks. That was so much information packed into 40 minutes. You guys are awesome. All right. We have about 2 minutes for questions. So if there are any questions for the presenters.
Thanks. About translation, is there any project for multilingual content?
Translating content was outside of the scope of this change. This was mostly about getting the platform itself translated. I'm not sure what thought has gone into translating contents and supporting multiple languages for courses themselves. I think maybe.
It's something people have asked about for a long time, but as far as I know, nobody has taken it on. It's a big project to support properly.
You'd run into sync issues. Like I updated the course. What can I do about translations? That's a difficult thing. Although I've heard like someone here is working on translating the courses with AI. I've lost which person is that, but basically you can like do you display the courses translated via machine learning? So yeah.
I believe someone at Edley has also been working with a media wiki integration so that you can have it like translations on the wiki. I do not know the details, but you should track down some from Edley.
They presented that at a meetup, so you could look at the meetups in YouTube and find the one where the Wikimedia Foundation people presented. This is a question for Dave. Dave, you talked about the UUIDs mismatch when you're exporting and importing for libraries, and I just wanted a clarification. Is that for old libraries, new libraries?
Yeah, that was for version 1 libraries, yes. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. So I have a question regarding translation. I know multiple front ends has been refactored as MFEs, and they have text that needs to be translated. Have been there any measure to reuse the existing translations, or how do you go about that?
So the MFEs are supported, and we've migrated the translations from Transifex from the old way to the new way. So there is like, hopefully that effort was not lost. Brian?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I assume you're asking about is if we have the same string in 3 MFEs, do we get that automatically translated?
Exactly, yeah.
And there is a slight piece of complication to that, which is the context for the string does matter. And so this is handled at the Transifex level with translation memory, where when a translator sees a string that has already been translated, it will auto-populate and they'll be able to say, oh yes, this is right, I want to approve this. But we still want that human level of saying, in this context, this translation for this string is still the appropriate translation, as opposed to having it be fully automatic and having it so as soon as you have OK somewhere, every OK is now translated the same way, when it may not make sense in every context.
Okay, thank you. Is there some sort of mapping between like the React messages IDs that are to be translated and .po in Django?
So the Django translations are the PO files.
Yeah.
In React, we don't use PO files. We instead have JSON files for that. But on the transifex side, it doesn't care.
Okay.
Right? They're just strings that are there, and then the translation memory won't know that this was a Django one or this was a React one. It will just know this string exists. This is how it was translated this time. Do you want to use that again?
Okay, thank you.
One final question.
Okay. I wanted to ask about the supported languages in the translations. We ran the platform in the Greek language, and there was a big problem since the micro frontends were introduced to go from the old way the platform was used with pure Django to the MFEs. We had to manually edit the MFEs so they will support the Greek language. And it's still not support. I don't know about the Redwood, but is there something to be done about that?
Yeah, this has come up a couple of times. We're trying to make sure that all of the MFEs are updated to actually know the languages that are supported at a configurable level, but there are still some places where we've found hard-coded stuff hiding in an MFE. So if you find an MFE that isn't doing that, please flag it. Please let us know. That is something that we don't want that to be a blocker for people, and we're doing our best to make that not a blocker, but it has still popped up here or there.
Yeah, I know front-end platform, which is used for all MFEs, it has a hard-coded list of supported languages for specific things in it as well. So that's something we should fix at some point.
Exactly.
All right, thank you, everybody. Let's hear it one more time for all our presenters.